Welcome to this session on privilege and critical allyship, mobilizing physiotherapists to dismantle inequalities. My name is Stephanie Nixon, and I'm so grateful to have been invited to have this conversation with you today. I need to begin by acknowledging the land on which I work, live, and play, which is in the place now called Toronto, on the land now called Canada. And for thousands of years, this exact land that I'm speaking to you from today has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. And this territory, this whole region, is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the beautiful Great Lakes. And today, this meeting place, Toronto, is still the home to many, many Indigenous folks from across Turtle Island, now known as North America. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Connecting to history, connecting to our place in it is what this talk is all about. And so there's another acknowledgement I need to make, and it's the wisdom that I've drawn from to develop the ideas for today's talk. None of the ideas I'm sharing with you today are new. Not a single insight I'm about to share with you is new. What I've done is come up with some new ways of translating these ideas, but it's crucial for everyone to understand that the ideas that I'm sharing have been circulating for decades and centuries, spoken from individuals and communities pushed to the margins to people in power who have been unwilling or unready to listen. And so in the translation work that I'm doing, I need to honor many, many folks who have helped me come to understand these ideas, including many Black and Indigenous women, including the ones listed here. So privilege and critical allyship, there's a lot of ways to participate in this kind of conversation. And I want to invite you to listen in today with two particular questions in mind. How might I think about this? All right. As we're going through this content, how might I think about this? And secondly, what does this have to do with me? And this session is designed to meet folks where they're at. Some of you have been thinking about this for a long time, and hopefully I'll take you just a little further. Many of you are coming to these ideas relatively new, and as to those folks, a very special welcome. Everyone is welcome into this conversation here, and the session is designed to meet you where you're at. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is find something to write on. And it might be an old-fashioned pen and paper. It might be a new screen that you open up on your computer. It might be the notes on your device. Find somewhere, and this is your gift to yourself, where as we're going along today, when you connect the dots, when something lands for you that's important for you, jot it down. Because you know how fleeting those moments are, right? They disappear. So jot it down so that later you can loop back to your own note to self, gift to self. And I'm going to keep prompting us along the way about how might I think about this? What does this have to do with me? This is from the mission of World Physiotherapy, believing that every individual is entitled to the highest possible standard, including respect for human dignity. Respect for human dignity. How might I think about that? What does that have to do with me? And much of what we're talking about today often gets framed as the social determinants of health. This is a report from the World Health Organization's Commission on the Social Determinants of Health from a little over a decade ago, arguably one of the most important reports. And right up front, they state, social justice is a matter of life and death. These inequities in health, avoidable health inequalities, pause, they're reminding us that these inequities that we're seeing have become so entrenched that they are almost normalized. They're almost viewed as if they are natural, as if this is just a biological difference that we're seeing differences in health outcomes, in mortality and disability, according to socially constructed determinants like gender and race and ethnicity. And they're reminding, or income, and they're reminding us that these are not natural, they are not normal, they are entirely avoidable. They are human made and they can be human unmade. Unpause. These inequities in health, avoidable health inequalities that arise because of the circumstances in which people grow, live, work, etc. And it's those circumstances and the power analysis of them that we're attending to today. So health inequities have been with us forever, but they are being laid bare in extraordinary ways right now in the middle of the COVID pandemic. We are seeing profound health disparities affecting communities of folks who have been pushed to the margins based on race, based on ability, and based on many, many other of the forces that have historically marginalized folks. So all of us see this happening all around us. It's in the headlines. For many of us, it is our work trying to attend to these inequities. And the invitation in this session today is to key into these questions. I know that's going on, but how might I think about it? Right? And what does it have to do with me? And so the way that I'm going to offer up some answers to those questions is through a particular framework, a particular model that I call the COIN model of privilege and critical allyship. I'm going to introduce you to this framework as a way of thinking about these issues and a way of thinking about what it has to do with each of us, every single one of us. And I want you to do something special now. I want you to, in a moment, hit pause on this recording, open up a different screen, and go watch a 1 minute and 40-second video. Okay? You're going to find it by Googling the monkey business illusion. It's called the monkey business illusion. It's by Daniel Simons. It's from 2010. And it's just, again, just a minute and a half long. And don't skip this. You're going to love that you went to watch this video. So what I'm going to do now is give you time to open up a second screen, find that video, watch it, and then come back to me, and we're going to make sense of it. Okay? And when you're going there, I just want you have one task while you're watching this video. I'm going to tell you now, and then the narrator is going to tell you again. You have one task, and it's to count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. Okay, hit pause now on this video and go watch the monkey business illusion. Okay, welcome back. You had one task. It was to count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. I'm wondering how many of you got that right. I've used this in a lot of spaces. It's usually about 80% of the people. So, and already we'll start seeing people saying, no, actually, I missed that. And then, of course, the key question, which was in the middle of that video, there was an adult dressed in a gorilla outfit who walked right into the middle of the screen, thumped his chest, and then walked out again. And was there anybody who missed that gorilla? And frequently, most people didn't, but often there are people who did. And so they're already laughing. But then comes the real gotcha, where actually the curtain changed color, a whole backdrop changed color, or of three people wearing black shirts, one of them walked right out of the screen. And is there anyone who missed that? And frequently the answer is yes, absolutely. I missed at least one of those things, if not all of them. And so what's the point, right? What's the point of this video? The point is that it's possible for there to be something as glaring as an adult dressed in a gorilla suit walking into a screen, then walking off, and it's possible not to see it, right? And that I think that this offers us a beautiful metaphor for privilege and how privilege operates in society, that there can be something as glaring as the whole backdrop color changing, and it's possible not to see it. Okay? But the good news is it could be otherwise. Because think of how I set up your capacity. I said you have one job. I built your capacity to focus really carefully in on how many times the player is wearing white pass the ball. And then the narrator said it, and I wrote it on the screen, and the video showed it on the screen. So we really built your capacity to do that one thing well. It could have been otherwise. We could have said, this is called the monkey business illusion for a reason. There is a giant gorilla going to walk out in the middle of, and your one job is to see the gorilla. And if we had set you up that way, there's no way you would have missed it. Or we could be even more complex and say, actually, there's a number of changes that are about to occur. This, and this, and we want you to watch for all of them. And we would work on fine-tuning our capacity to come and see it. And so it is with privilege. that it is entirely within our ability to come to see it. We just need to learn to build our capacity. And that's the point of this conversation today. So we're walking a number of steps through today's session. We're leaving that one, we're on to a new one. And in this step, this exercise, it starts with me acknowledging that the mere fact that you are tuning into this webinar tells me that you've arrived at a particular place in your career, in your growth, in your development, that's pretty wonderful, right? That this is stuff that you care about. You're linked to health in some way. You might be a physiotherapist or a clinician or someone who's just really interested in promoting health or interested in justice in other ways. But you've got the bandwidth in your day. You're at that place in your own career where this has become a priority. And that's more than most folks in the world, right? Especially those of us that have one or more degrees in higher education. That's extremely rare. And we all still have new heights that we're going to climb. But I want to stop and just say this minute that you are watching this video right now, you have already achieved more than most people in the world ever will. And this is not a trick. This is not to make you feel guilty or anything like that. It's to say we are all in a very special place. And so what I want you to do is reflect back on the journey of getting to the place you're at now. And I want you to think about one of the facilitators or strengths or assets that has helped you to get to where you are today. And I also want you to think about one of the obstacles or challenges that you've had to overcome, or perhaps that you still battle day in, day out to be in the position that you're in. Okay, so a quiet moment, including folks watching this on their own, make this real by calling to the front of your mind one of the facilitators that's helped you to get to where you are, but also one of the challenges. Take a quiet moment to do that. Now, I've had the chance to have this exact conversation with many rooms full of people. And I want to share some of the ideas that have come up. And I think what's going to happen is that some of you are going to see your ideas reflected here and some of you aren't. And that's completely okay. That's completely okay. Watch with me as we see some of the ideas that came up. When I asked about some of the facilitators or the strengths, some folks talked about persevering and hard work and dedication that help them get to where they are. And others talked about having access to a great education. Some folks talked about how hard they had to work to make ends meet, whereas others talked about the financial support they received from their families. Now, interestingly, it also frequently comes up about how folks did not have financial support from family. Others talked about the importance of having access to grants, educational grants, or other forms of loans. And some folks have talked about the importance of taking care of themselves. But the flip side was also true. Some folks have said that's actually been one of my biggest challenges is not taking good enough care of myself. And when we've talked about what are some more of those challenges, some folks have talked about having a major health challenge themselves or a family member. Others have talked about the lack of access to free, high-quality health care. Others have talked about being their own biggest critic or struggling to find strategies to fit in or not having English as a first language. Keeping in mind my context, which is I've most often had these conversations in Canada, in Anglophone Canada. Others have talked about having a disability or not, or having too many passions or struggling to find a focus. Many folks have talked about mentors, so either finding great mentors to offer guidance or the flip side of that, the lack of great mentors. And others have talked about having great mentors around them. I'm going to continue in a moment. But you see what's happening here, right? We've got a purple list on the left and a blue list on the right. Keep an eye. Others have talked about how being in a place where being gay or trans is not illegal. Some folks have talked about being born in Canada. Others have talked about being Black or not. And I have two more that I'm going to add to one of these lists. The next one is I've had a lot of folks talk about the importance of wealth and class, and sometimes how it's been framed is being born into a family that owns property. Being born into a family that owns property. Which list am I about to put this on? The purple list on the left or the blue list on the right? Being born into a family that owns property. And my last one, I've had folks talk about how they've had to learn to deal with setbacks and with people who aren't on your side, right? Which is a proxy for a lot of things. Learning to deal with setbacks and with people who aren't on your side. Which list does this belong in? So what's going on here? What's going on here? I asked you two questions, strengths and obstacles. And then I made two lists. The purple on the left and the blue on the right. But you noticed right from the start that when I asked about strengths, I didn't put them only in one list. I started with persevering and then I went right over to the next list, having access to a great education. And the same with challenges. They showed up on both lists. And frequently, I gave the example and then ... or not, that the flip could also be true. Something that's a strength could also be a challenge, and I located them in the same point. So what you figured out as you were watching this unfold is that I asked you two questions and I made two lists, but that the lists that I just made are not the answers to those two questions. And yet neither were they willy-nilly. And so the challenge for you is, what are these lists of? What is it that is coherent about the collection of points in purple on the left? And what is it that holds together as coherent about the collection of items on the right in blue? You see that space at the top of the page? I'm about to fill it with the headings for these lists. What might that be? What might be adjectives that describe what's going on in these two different lists? And I think what some of you are figuring out right now is this idea that the list on the left seems to be about characteristics that are individualistic, right? That are personal, that are internal, and that the list on the right seems to be more about environmental, external, societal, institutional, structural. And there's something else that you noticed, and it has to do with how much control one might have over these factors, that the ones on the left are largely within your control, whereas the ones on the right are not. Right? They're largely out of one's control. You do not get to choose what family you are born into, what is your first language, where you live happens to be in a place where there's free, where you grow up is where there's free healthcare, where you're surrounded by great mentors because of a social network that you just happen to find yourself in, right? These are far less under one's control. And so why does all of this matter? And why all this matters is because if we rewind to about 8 minutes ago, remember we started by saying it is important to recognize how far all of us have come in our own careers and worlds, and what was it that helped us to get here or got in our way. And we threw a whole bunch of factors together, and then I teased them out according to the factors that were within our control, the things we did to earn the position we're in now. And then this big blue list on the right, all of the things that shaped us being in our position that we're in now, but that we did not ask for, we did not earn, right? That were not under our control. We either lucked into or unlucked into each of these factors. We didn't earn it. If it works for us, we got an advantage. If it worked against us, we got a disadvantage, but in neither case did we earn it. And so it sounds like I'm proposing that what helped us get to where we are today was not only of our own making, list on the left, then that's exactly right. And society is so focused on an individualistic, some societies, the societies I am part of, North American for instance, are so focused on an individualistic orientation to healthcare and to education that we frequently focus on exclusively on the list on the left, at the exclusion of the profoundly powerful influence of the factors on the right. And so here's all of that in a nutshell. It's the idea that there are norms in society, there's patterns, there's structures, there's systems in society, the list on the right, that work for or against people, that actually have very little to do with individual merit or worth or behavior. You do not earn them. And I've come to think about these patterns as a coin. This is the metaphor of the coin, where the coin itself is the big societal pattern. The coin is not a person, it is the social structure into which we are all socialized. And I talk about folks being on the top of the coin if the position you happen to find yourself in, just because of who you are, gives you a benefit that others don't, and that you didn't earn it, you didn't ask for it, you might not even know you're getting it. You get it though because of who you happen to be. And the bottom of the coin is the opposite. This same social structure that gives unearned advantage also gives unearned disadvantage, not because anyone did anything to earn it, but just because of who they happen to be. And what do I call the top of the coin? In this framework, I call it privilege. And what do I call the bottom of the coin? In this framework, I call it oppression. This is the end of the first section of this talk, and we're now going to shift into the second section where we make sense of this coin and why it matters for all of us. I call the top of the coin privilege, all right, unearned advantage. And I call the bottom of the coin oppression. The language of privilege and oppression will be used in nuanced different ways in different contexts and will be right? I am using them in a very specific way in this particular framework. So I'm inviting us to use it as a, and the reason I'm doing that is to give us a helpful nomenclature, right? A way of having a conceptual framework and attaching words to it that then allows us to grapple with much more complex ideas once we have this shared starting point. Now, it's important to recognize that there's not just one coin for all privilege and all oppression. It's that there's a whole bunch of different coins that are contextually based, all kinds of different patterns that are structural, right? This isn't about individuals. This is about historical structures that have been developed very intentionally to give advantage to some and disadvantage to others. And we need to be nuanced with our analysis of what are these coins and how might they operate. And so some of them have to do with class, racism, again, the structure of racism, structural racism, something that's been around for centuries that we are all socialized into. Sexism, ableism, heterosexism, and on and on and on the list goes. I'm going to hit pause for a minute. At the beginning, I invited you to find something to write on, or type on, or speak into. Your job throughout this webinar is to identify the one or two or three important new insights you are having that matter for you today. It was just a reminder that my job is to deliver the stuff. Your job is to make it work for you. So if any of this is feeling new or important, this is your chance to jot it down. Okay, here we go. Why does this matter for us? Right, we were talking about it linked to our careers a moment ago. But this doesn't just matter for people's careers. These forces, these coins, they shape who's healthy, who's ill, who gets injured, who accesses care, the kind of care they get. And in many cases, these coins shape and often determine who lives and who dies. These are the avoidable health inequities that WHO's Commission on the Social Determinants of Health were pointing us to. And too often we talk about these health inequities without discussing power, without discussing systems of inequality. So how might we think about this? Stay with me. Let's link it to health equity. So quite often, when we talk about health equity, we talk about it as if it's a specific point that's happening to a particular group of people, but it's relational, isn't it? It's relational. It's the relation between the health. In this case, I'm talking about on the top and the bottom of the coin. And so I want to invite folks to first think about the bottom of the coin and think about groups of folks, whole communities of people whose health is worsened, right, who have worse health outcomes because of the unearned disadvantage they receive from different social structures. Let me try that again. I'm inviting you to try and think about, call to the front of your mind, what are the common terms that we give to groups of people whose health is worse because of unearned disadvantage they receive from the coin, right? Not because of anything they did, but just because of who they happen to be. The unearned disadvantage they receive makes their health worse. What are common terms that we might use for those groups when we're doing our health promotion work, when we're doing our research around health equity, when we're teaching others? And I'll propose it's terms like marginalized populations. You probably were thinking vulnerable groups. In HRV, we talk priority populations, priority neighborhoods, hard to reach, hard to access, high risk, disadvantaged, and on goes. Yeah, this sounds familiar, and I'm sure there's a few you came up with as well. Let's go to the top of the coin. What are the common terms that we use to describe the groups of people whose health is much better because of the unearned advantage they receive from these same coins? What are the really common terms that we all use when we're discussing this in our teaching and our research and our clinical care? And what I'll propose is that there are no terms. What I'll propose is we actually don't have a nomenclature. We don't have a language for groups that receive unearned advantage. That in fact, the top of the coin in this work is frequently disappeared. It's frequently invisibilized. So the focus is actually just the bottom of the coin. Folks on the top of the coin, not usually part of the story. And it's hard to even think of what would those terms be, right? Like unfairly advantaged populations, free lift groups, like these just aren't common, it's just not common jargon. We don't have a nomenclature for it. And I'll take it one step further to say that often when we're talking about health equity, we not only disappear the top of the coin, we disappear the coin itself, so that we end up exclusively talking about people on the bottom of the coin. Now, should we be talking about people on the bottom of the coin? Of course we should. It is a deeply unjust position, and we should be doing great work to try and redress those injustices for folks faced on the bottom of the coin. But what are the implications for health equity if we frame it exclusively as the bottom of the coin and disappear the coin and the top of the coin? All right, let's try that again. This is for you. This is an enormous connect the dots moment. Why is it bad for health equity? Why is it counterproductive? Why is it reinforcing of the status quo, in fact, despite our claims to be doing health equity work, justice work? Why is it actually counterproductive if we only frame health equity as the bottom of the coin and not the coin itself or the top of the coin? Let's take a moment to work that out. Yes, I'm reading your minds. And I'm going to distill these good ideas that you're all having into two. And there's more than two, but I'm going to distill two for us. And the first one is that it limits the thinkable solution. It limits the universe of possible solutions to those that address the problem of the bottom of the coin. What we set as the problem in the first place instantly creates the universe of possible solutions that can follow. And so if we only frame the problem as the bottom of the coin, we will only devise solutions that address the problem of the bottom of the coin. It does not follow that we will come up with solutions to address the coin unless we have understood the coin to be part of the problem. And this next one is a real biggie. How does disappearing the top of the coin allow people like me, who find myself on the top of many coins, to position myself in relation to this work? How does this allow me to position myself? If I think, for instance, about racism, where the top of the coin is focused on white or white passing, that's me. If I want to do anti-racist work, I'm on the top of the coin, but I frame equity issues as only the bottom of the coin, as if there is no top of the coin. How does that, what are the implications for that? How does that allow me to frame and understand and position myself in this work? And the answer is, it allows me to position myself as not part of the story, as not even on this page, as not part of this dynamic. It allows me to see myself as neutral, unconnected to this system of inequality. It allows me to position my orientation as altruistic. I'm sweeping in with my great intentions to help those poor folks on the bottom of the coin, as opposed to understanding I am part of this system. I am complicit in it. And by rejecting, by disappearing my own role in this system, it allows me to perpetuate the status quo, to reposition myself as an expert, as a saver, as a helper, as someone who's here to fix, as opposed to a really serious part of the problem who has work to do. And that's the gorilla, right? It's coming to see that. It's coming to see that there's a coin, there's a top of the coin, and on this particular coin, I'm on the top of that coin. That is seeing the gorilla. And once you can do that, it opens up such possibility for change. All right, so this has been pretty lofty. We've been talking ideas. Let's talk about some specific coins for a minute. And the two final parts of this talk, we're going to talk about some specific coins, and then we're going to talk about what the implications for action might be. So stick with me. Let's talk about the coin of ableism. All right, this is so important in our field. Ableism. This is about the big social structure, the big set of norms about what gets to count as normal ways of moving, speaking, hearing. Okay? It's not concrete, it's not a fact. These are sets of ideas that get to be taken as normal. And if the way that you move, speak, think align with those norms, then society is set up to work really well for you. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So who's on the bottom of the coin? It's folks who are considered disabled. And who's on the top of the coin? It's folks who are considered able-bodied. Right? It's the same structure that gives unearned advantage or disadvantage. Now, a reminder, is this about good or bad people? Am I saying that people on the bottom are good and people on the top are bad? No, not at all. Right? Go back to what the coin model is pretty simple. The top is unearned advantage. The bottom is unearned disadvantage. You didn't do anything to earn it. You just get it because of who you happen to be. So if someone says to someone like me, gives me feedback, I'm an able-bodied person, that, you know, you have some ableist privilege, it's not an insult. It's a fact. I do, actually. Yeah, you're right. Or, I don't totally understand that yet, but I need to think and learn more about that. But it's not a claim that I'm a bad person. It's a claim that the way I happen to think and move and hear aligns with what's accepted in society. Meanwhile, who's more expert on how ableism plays out in society? Is it the folks on the top of the coin or folks on the bottom? It is clearly folks on the bottom, right? It's clearly folks on the bottom who can see clear as day how ableism plays out in society. Folks on the top frequently don't even know there is a coin called ableism, whereas folks on the bottom are like, whew, I battle it day in, day out, right? Where's the expertise? The bottom of the coin. Or heterosexism, right? So heterosexual is attraction to someone of the opposite sex. Heterosexism is the assumption that heterosexual is the right and normal and only and default way of being in society. So there are many societies that view heterosexual or straight as the right way to be. So I happen to love people of the opposite sex. And so I happen to be straight. So I happen to find myself on the top of that coin. Meanwhile, I have many friends and colleagues who do not. Is this, I'm a bad person, they're a good person? No, it's that I get unearned advantage and others don't. And meanwhile, who's expert on how heterosexism plays out? Who can see it so clearly? It's not me on the top of the coin, it's the bottom of the coin. And here's the thing, we've got loads of great people in our field who are doing this work. And I wanted to point to Megan Ross and Jenny Setchell for a moment, who've been doing terrific work on understanding not only on how our profession does or doesn't do a good job with folks on the bottom of the coin, but how our profession might be reproducing this coin itself. And then racism, right? Such an important concept and so misunderstood. So this is a slight on-ramp to thinking about racism. Been around for hundreds of years, designed by people with skin that looks like mine to subordinate and dehumanize people whose skin is darker, right? It was created to justify power imbalance. There's nothing biological about race. It was invented to mobilize power. And it structures our societies today still. And so whether we know it or not, whether we realize it or not, the folks who benefit from structural racism are folks who are white or white passing. Did they ask for it? No. Do they, most of the time, and frequently don't even know they're getting it, right? This unearned advantage. But it doesn't mean they're not getting unearned advantage. It just means they don't realize there's a coin and that they're on the top of it. And meanwhile, folks on the bottom of the coin can see this clear as day. Is this about good or bad people? Am I suggesting that bottom of the coin people are good and top of the coin people are bad? No. Right? It's that I happen to find myself in a position on the top of the coin. So if I receive feedback from someone that as a white person, I benefit from structural racism, right? That I enjoy white privilege. It's not an insult. It's a statement of fact. And it's my job on the top of the coin to say, yeah, you're right. I need to really attend to that and find ways to interrupt this unhelpful pattern. Or if I don't understand it, it's my job to say, okay, I need to think more about this. I'm on the top of the coin and I know where the expertise lies. It lies on the bottom of the coin, so I appreciate the feedback. In fact, I appreciate the feedback however you're giving it to me, right? On the top of the coin, our job is to learn about our position, and our job is to hear our feedback that we receive from the bottom of the coin, however it is delivered. And so we've got some awesome leaders in our field, and I want to point to Tracy Blake, Dr. Tracy Blake, who recently had an outstanding editorial in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and Darren, I think, is going to be popping various links in the chat box for us as we go. Or Uchenna Osai, and I hope I'm saying her name right. I actually haven't had the chance to meet her yet, but I'm going to be taking her course. She's out of the States. I'm going to be taking her course this weekend on intersections of racism and power. Right? That's my learning to do, and I'm seeking ways to do that learning. And I also wanted to point to the great leader of the Guyana Physio Association, Ariane Munger, who's had such good conversations to help me learn about how racism plays out in her part of the world. And the coin of racism gives rise to other coins as well, including but not limited to anti-Black racism, which is so important right now and has been, I think, really front of mind since the May 25th murder of George Floyd. And so just a reminder that this is a nuanced form of racism where the folks who are disadvantaged are Black. And the folks who receive unearned advantage from this same structure is everyone who is not Black. And there's lots of folks in our field who are doing good work on this. And I want to point in particular to Emmanuel Ovala out of the UK, who has been teaching me so much. And he and some of his colleagues have been leading what they call the Cultural Health Club for racialized physios. They've got a GoFundMe going right now. So if you want to move some money, that would be a great direction to go. And here's a biggie, especially where I live, colonialism. And we understand that the folks who are disadvantaged by colonialism are First Peoples, are Indigenous folks. But we rarely think about how these same structures benefit people like me, right, who are not Indigenous. And so that was part of doing the land acknowledgement, to say there's a coin here and I'm on the top of it. We have awesome Indigenous physios in our field, and we need to center their ideas, their ways of knowing, and their work. And so here's just one that I want to flag, and it's Dr. Ricky Bell, a Maori physio who's taught me so much. Now, colonization also plays out in terms of our north-south relations. And here's a pic of a group of folks from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, from Western Kenya, and from the University of Zambia, with whom I've been working and learning in terms of how we might reimagine and deliver PT education around HIV care in that part of the world because of a totally different context and structure. And then finally, class. And this is not the last coin, but I just wanted to finish with this one to say the role of class, of wealth and poverty, of capitalism is so profound in this work. It's a bit of a next level conversation, but one of the limits of the coin model would be the way that I have these coins separated, whereas lots of folks would argue, and I would fully agree, that actually the coin of racism cannot be uncoupled with the coin of capitalism. But that's a talk for another day. So remind me, can people be on the privilege of some coins and the oppression side of other coins at the same time? But can you be on the top of some and the bottom of others at the same time? And the answer is yeah, of course, that's all of us, right? That's why we all, in this talk makes sense, because we all inhabit the tops of some coins. This is for all of us, those parts of our identity where we're on top, right? And there's other parts of our identity where we're on the bottom. And this is the idea of intersectionality that was introduced by Black feminist scholars Kimberly Crenshaw and further advanced by Patricia Hill Collins. And in this cartoon, we have a racialized disabled person in a chair and what's meant to be, I think, a white able-bodied guy walking by who pats him on the head. And the guy in the chair says, I don't know whether I'm being patronized for being Black or disabled. I don't know whether I'm being patronized for being Black or disabled. And the idea here is that there's two coins at play: racism and ableism. And that the guy walking by is on the top of both. And the guy on the bottom in the chair is on the bottom of both. And the patterns of how folks on the top behave, patronizing, entitled, thinking they are the experts, but we know who's expert in these, right? It's people on the bottom. That the quip here is, I don't know whether I'm being patronized for that coin or that coin. And the answer is really, it's intersectional. So actually these coins don't operate in separation, they operate together. And we need to nuance our analysis to come to understand how they operate together, right? And different coins will matter differently in different contexts. And again, what I've located as the possible planes here, it's not all the planes. And it's not all the planes that will matter in the context that you are in today, right? It's contingent. So the space that you're in today, there are likely some coins that I haven't talked about. It's just different than my world here in Canada. So what? Right, so that was all the foundational ideas. And the only reason to learn new things is to be able to mobilize them into action. And so here we are moving into the action part of this talk. So what? What does all this mean? And here's the point. The point is that if you want to work towards dismantling an inequity, all right, taking apart a coin, an ableism or a racism, that different actions, a whole different orientation is called for, depending on how you are related to that inequity. All right, depending on whether you find yourself on the top or bottom of that coin. Now, if you're on the bottom of any of these coins and you want to dismantle that inequity, you do not need a webinar from me. The movements that have, the social movements that have dismantled systems of inequality have historically and still are driven by the collectives of people on the bottom of the coin. Brilliantly, persistently, relentlessly, powerfully, cleverly. Right? It's Black folks who have led civil rights movements. It's disabled folks who are leading movements around anti-ableism and accessibility. It's Indigenous folks who are leading movements around trying to save people and the planet from colonization. Right? That's where the expertise lies. So if you find yourself on the bottom of a coin and you want to do that work, that's the place to go for that expertise. What we're doing today is top of the coin work. And so I'm inviting you to think about just one of these coins where you find yourself on top and you want to, you are, or wish to be more actively involved in dismantling that coin. And I'm going to offer you an orientation that may be a tweak from, it's a far cry from the way society tells us we are supposed to operate on the top of the coin. I call it practicing critical allyship. And here's what it is. And this comes from a group called the Anti-Oppression Network. Allyship is an active, consistent, and arduous, really hard practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person in a position of privilege, so top of the coin, seeks to operate in solidarity with folks on the bottom of the coin. And this is very different to the orientation that we are taught in society and that we are taught in clinical training programs like physio, which is that our job is to save or fix or help. And I'd like to propose that there's times that saving and fixing and helping is really good and called for and really important, but not when it comes to dismantling systems of inequality. That orientation amongst folks on the top reinforces the power imbalance as opposed to recognizing the expertise of folks on the bottom and the need for humility of folks on the top. So this practicing allyship, it's not an identity, it's a practice. It's the day-to-day steps we take through our world. And it's seeing the gorilla, seeing that there's a coin and that we're on the top of it, that makes this reorientation possible. And so here it is. This is the one slide. This is going to be the before, and then there's going to be an after where I give you 4 reframes. So what is this reorientation for those of us who want to do better, find ourselves on the top of the coin and want to do better in terms of reducing health inequities? So this is me before. My orientation was I use my expertise, top of the coin, because that's what I've been taught, is that I'm the expert. It's my job to go fix the people on the bottom, right? I use my expertise to help folks on the bottom deal with the coin. Here's the fundamental reframe that gets made possible by understanding coins. I see and understand my own role in upholding these coins, these systems of oppression that create health inequities. That's step one. I'm no longer positioned as the expert. I learn from the expertise of and operate in solidarity with folks on the bottom, not to save them, to dismantle the coin because it's bad for all of us. And that this work on the top of coin work includes building insight and mobilizing action amongst other folks on the top of the coin. That's the work we're doing today. I'm top of the coin talking to you, top of the coin, to say we need to do better. And that all of this is about action. Today we're focused on learning, right? But learning as an end in itself continues to perpetuate the status quo. What we actually need is material change. So we need learning en route to action, and collective action at that, that is led by folks on the bottom of the coin. Yeah? So here we are at the end of our big journey together, and hopefully you have this feeling of like, okay, whew, that was fast, and that was a lot. Ooh, and it's early in the morning, or it's middle of my Saturday. But hopefully you're at a point where you're leaning in a bit, where you're like, okay, there's something here that's important for me. I collected one of these ideas or three of these connect the dot moments in my notes, and I'm ready for some more. And so what now? And what I'd like to propose is 2 steps. Very simple. The 2 steps themselves are gigantic, but there's only 2 steps. Step number 1, if you think there's merit to this framing of inequalities as a coin, there's 2 resources I want to point you to be able to go over this again and deepen your understanding of this initial framing of the coin model. One is a webinar, and thank you, Darren, for popping links into the box. One is a webinar. This is me with short hair. This is a talk I gave a few years ago, but it's the same content. And the other is a paper. It all does the same work we just did today and allows you to deepen your understanding of this coin model of privilege and critical allyship. And particularly if you're interested in more of the so what, the paper, the whole second half of the paper goes into the so what in a way that we didn't get to today. I tend to think about this framing as an on-ramp, right? This is an on-ramp that allows us to get our heads around our relationship and complicity in these systems that then allows step 2, which is we need to go do some serious new work around the specific coins where we are on top, right? And it's like, how do I do that work? How might I do that work? And the answer is, how do we not know this? Folks on the bottom of the coin have been trying to tell us this for decades. It's out there, right? Another way of putting it is you've just been diagnosed with privilege. If you had just gone to your doctor and received, and it's a terrible diagnosis, right? Many, many people are going to be harmed. Many are going to die. It's contagious. It's not going to get any better unless you deal with it. You've been diagnosed with this condition. Well, you've just been diagnosed with these top of the coin positions. So what is it you would do if you just received a medical diagnosis? You would do everything you could to come to learn about it on your own. And there's loads out there to help us do that learning. But a reminder, the point is not learning. The point is material change. And so all of this is en route to mobilizing in collective action under the leadership with accountability to folks on the bottom of the coin. And so here's a quote that kind of, you may have seen before, it's so lovely, that sums up this reorientation for those of us who find ourselves on the top of coins, which is, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, these systems of inequality are bad for all of us, they harm all of us, then let us work together. Thank you for your hour of time.
Thank you, Stephanie. This was just amazing. I think it's hitting me from not only an intellectual problem solving, but it's also very emotional and inspiring. I think things like this are going to allow us to invite all the voices to the table so that there's more of a level for, playing field. And I would like to welcome any questions or any comments people have here today. You can either open your mic and talk, or you can send us a message through the chat line. Amazing, Stephanie, bravo.
I want to thank folks for the great things that are showing up in the chat. I didn't have a chance to look at it throughout, but I'm noticing, I think Mershin, you popped a great link in there. Others too, that's so welcome. I'll be reviewing all of it afterwards. And one other small point, or actually big point, but I'll make it briefly. I'm so glad that you mentioned the role of emotions in this work. We're taught as academics and as clinicians that emotions don't have a place in our work, that actually we're supposed to be objective and calm and not have emotions. That is part of the functioning, that is part of the mechanics of how these systems of inequality work, is to distance ourselves from this. These systems of inequality are embodied. They're embodied. And the emotions part of this work, the heart part of this work, it is part of it. If when I was talking today you felt, then that is good. Pay attention. Each of those feelings, the ones that feel good, but also the ones that don't. Because frequently that business of unlearning, I often think that the best way I know I'm unlearning something is if it feels really, really bad, right? I feel really uncomfortable. My skin gets a little prickly. I get a little queasy. I feel unsettled. I get a little scared. I'm like, oh, that's a sign something good is happening here in terms of my unlearning around these systems.
Any other comments? Any further comments?
Hello, everybody.
Has a comment. Hi, Emma.
I think someone else wanted to say something. I'm happy to wait.
Okay, that's me. Hi, Emma. This is Nina from Nigeria. We're glad you could make out time to join us today. Hi, Stephanie, thank you so much for your very wonderful presentation. You know, you really had my mind rolling. In Nigeria, some years back, working with people living with HIV/AIDS, there was a concept that came up: meaningful involvement of people living with HIV/AIDS. So while you were talking, I'm like, okay, so this is something like that. But I don't know how far we've been able to go with that in involving the people we are trying to help in their plan of care. I don't know if that's what you're trying to bring out, because I think it's a very important aspect of physiotherapy, rehabilitation as a whole. We need to think more on how to involve people in the kind of care that we are giving them. So thank you very much for this. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing MIPA. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is, I mean, it is mind-blowing, and it's going to set us off on another tangent, trying to better our practice. Thank you.
Wow, Nina, that means a lot to me. I've been following your work. I'm a big fan. And let me just build on what you said to just remind us, like, we all know the saying, nothing about us without us, right? From our some of us may be disabled, but for me, for my disabled colleagues and partners, we know, those of us working in HIV, the idea of JIPA and MIPA, the greater and meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. The trick here is the invitation to say, what's the top of those coins? Is it possible that we tend to think about that as only the folks on the bottoms of the coin? And is it possible that we bring that orientation of helping and fixing? And how would it shift our work and our thinking? How might I think about this differently? What does it have to do with me if we thought of how the coins are playing out here, where the expertise lies, all right? How we receive unearned advantage from ableism, right? How we are complicit in the systems that these folks are, and meanwhile, how we hold on the top of the coin, hold most of the power, material power, resource power, administrative power. What would it mean if we shifted and actually had an orientation that worked in solidarity with, as opposed to trying to help those partners on the bottom of the coin? That's the invitation here. I see Dave as well. I wonder if we could, I'd love to hear your voice.
Sure. Hi, everybody. And Dr. Nixon, thank you so much. That was really just great. I was not familiar with the coin model before, and I enjoyed so much learning about it. I also wanted to just, one thing that kind of came to mind as I was writing down my own notes is that as a cisgendered gay male, obviously I guess am somewhat connected to the well, not somewhat, totally connected to the LGBTQ coin, but also on that coin, I don't feel like it's always like one or the other, that I'm always on the top or that I'm always on the bottom, that it's actually a little bit more nuanced, and that sometimes I feel like there are some advantages to being in that coin, just as I guess, sort of a blunt example, like the, double income, no kids sort of model of lifestyle. Whereas obviously many times being on the disadvantaged side of the coin, like having the crap beaten out of me in high school. So those kinds of things make the coin kind of complicated sometimes. I just thought I'd share that and see what you thought of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that, David. Earlier this year, I was part of a panel talking on International Women's Day. And so what I did for that was to really try and think through how many coins could I come to understand as part of the LGBTQ story? Because it's not just one, is it? Like you introduced yourself in part by saying as a gay cis man. So the coin of heterosexualism, heteronormativity, you're on the bottom of that coin.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
cisgenderism, right, where folks are cis on the top and trans on the bottom. You'll recall, everyone, that cis and trans has to do with the alignment of the sex you've been assigned at birth, right? It's a boy or it's a girl, with the gender you grow up feeling inside. So I was handed to my folks, it's a girl. I grew up feeling like a girl. That alignment means I'm cis, C-I-S, cisgender. That's top of the coin. And yet that's one of those coins where transgender folks, where there's not a match, it's so othered that we don't even think that there is a top of the coin, right? It's just
Right.
that trans is so different.
It depends a lot on the
Gender
coin.
privilege is powerful. So yeah, you're pushing us to really attend to the nuances of which coins am I on the top of, which on the bottoms, and when does it matter differently. And for folks who have lots of experience on the bottom of coins, that is one of your best learning tools, right? Let's take the example of I'm straight, but for folks who are queer, how well you understand heteronormativity and how much you wish folks like me would get it.
Mhm.
And then picture the coin that you're on the top of, pick one of those and say, oh, folks on the bottom of that coin are thinking the same thing about me. And so what's my opportunity for learning here?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to come in at that point as well. And thank you, David, for bringing that question up. My name is Emma Stokes. I live in, I'm in Qatar in the Middle East. And Steph, thanks so much for a fabulous webinar. It's just wonderful. And I've been on an enormous learning journey for a long time, but particularly in the last few years in my role in World Physiotherapy. And I think the point, the conversation that you're having is really interesting. And it's about how do we start. And so I'm not talking from a healthcare practitioner perspective now. I'm talking more about how we enact our profession globally. So I'm going to maybe take a slight shift, but it is that idea of how do we start to create an awareness of what you've just been talking about, right? Which is that, you know, the World Physiotherapy is 122 member organizations. So it's an enormously globally diverse community where there's a variety of different religious beliefs, there's a variety of different resources, there's a variety of different disparities in different ways, there's a variety of different places where people are either in in positions of privilege, and then there's just, the complexity is just so enormous. How do we start to sensitize people to the fact that there are so many coins, and that at some point we can be on the top of the coin, and also on the bottom of the coin. And being on the top of the coin, I guess that every decision has an issue around advantage and disadvantage. And how do we start getting people to think a bit more in a way that's a bit more nuanced when we're part of a global community? Because UC's lecture, which if your course is really amazing about that as well, because it does talk about some of the privileges of some parts of our community who, you know, that might be on the other side of the coin for some things, and then on the different side of the coin for other things. So I'm curious about how we start to sensitize and put this into our education in a way that gets our students to think about their, and also our colleagues and our peers to think about their privilege, right? And to say, you know, yeah, I don't do work with 5 white guys anymore. It's like my catchphrase at the moment is, if there's 5 white guys in the project and nobody else, and they all, or there's a whole pile of people that all look like me, I'm not going to do it. But I'm in a position of privilege also, because I'm at the point of my academic career where I don't have to do it. So what is it that we can do as a global community, or something that you think we can do better as a global community to start making this a more nuanced conversation? I don't know if I've made any sense at all, so apologies. Thank you for your comment, which was a nice segue in. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling.
I was so delighted to see you join the call, Emma. Thank you very much. Folks might not know that Emma came to spend time at the University of Toronto, so lots of my early ideas around this were shaped through conversations that we had. So it feels so nice to be connected to you. Hello to Qatar. So here's what I propose. If Emma has just asked a question, so how might we take this up as a profession internationally, right? And each of us have our various contexts, our more micro, meso, and macro contexts, our spheres of influence. Every single one of us has a whole bunch of spheres of influence, some more formal, some less. I'm going to give a response to that question, but I want everyone to think about the answer to that question, right? This is our collective work. And if you're up for it, pop it in the chat box so we can just see what's bubbling. And on my way to offering an answer, I want to preface it by saying, we don't need to be perfect in this work, right? One of the tactics of these systems of inequality for folks on the top of the coin is an assumed expertise, is a generated fear of ever making a mistake, right? And the function of that is to immobilize folks and preserve the status quo. So the only way to do this work on the top of the coin is with a good heart and lots of learning and a readiness to make mistakes, to be vulnerable. Right? And when we make mistakes, to hear it, receive the feedback, apologize, move on. I call it getting in the weeds. I am in the weeds. I make mistakes so often, and I'm like, oh, I did it again. But I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm doing the work. So at this point, just inviting folks that if you wish to put something into the chat box, don't feel like it's going to be judged. Don't feel like it needs to be perfect. Don't feel like it needs to be perfectly thought out. Think of it as a collective exercise. That when I said collective action, this is us putting our wise minds together from all our different places about, I just listened to that talk. I'm really interested in our profession, physiotherapy, coming to understand and mitigate the role that we play as a profession in reproducing these coins, right? How might we do that? Because the gist of it is, remember, these coins, they're societal. We're all socialized into it. And it's not just individuals, it's our institutions. We are structured, our professions, healthcare in general, higher education, it's all structured by these. So the question is not if these coins play out in our clinic, our classroom, etc. It's how. It's not if, it's how. And the goal here, on the top of the coin, the gift is having it illuminated for us, because as long as we stay in the dark, we can't do anything about it. So the greatest gift is to get feedback on having it brought to light, the ways that that policy, how it might reproduce coins. As soon as we can come to see it, then we can interrupt it. And that's what we want. So overall, my interest in response to your question, Emma, is making the concept that there are coins in the first place and that our profession reinforces them, reproduces them, making that thinkable, making that concept normalized, because that's the on-ramp. That makes all the rest of this work possible. And that's not currently the starting point broadly in healthcare or within physiotherapy.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any final comments or questions? Okay.
This is Anne. I think we had a question from Mershan Pillay in South Africa.
Yes, thanks very much for noticing. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And I'm sorry we never got to meet each other when you were in South Africa the last time, but I'm glad I made this meeting. I think I must quickly declare that I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm an audiologist and a speech therapist. So I'm coming in literally from the outside, listening in. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is that our disciplinary interests prevent us often from connecting with the things that actually are very common issues between our rehabilitation professions. And so I'm just wondering whether there's any value in you considering reaching out and speaking across disciplines, because what I'm finding most fascinating is these are exactly the same issues that we're talking about in speech therapy, in audiology, and I work closely with physio and OT as well. So I know that these are various other issues that have popped up all over the place in the last few years. And so I'd like to maybe remind ourselves of the importance of doing this work jointly, because that's another kind of thing I think we need to look more, not in fear of being strapped in the silo, but just because there's, it's power in numbers there. And I think we'd be able to share so much more. There'd be a lot of critical thinking that will be developed differently. And perhaps that's another form of having to de-imperialize the way in which professions actually manage themselves. And yeah, so I thank you very much for this, and I'm hoping that we'll have more of these and then we can connect across disciplines.
It's wonderful and so welcome and spot on, right? This isn't about physio. We're making it about physio today. But I've been giving this talk to a lot of different groups. Doesn't matter who they are. First few slides, I can craft it to whoever the institution is, because the same ideas apply. Everyone's got their work to do, and so today we're thinking physio. But what I popped into the chat box there was a link to an outstanding short article that calls out, that names, for the rehabilitation sciences broadly, the lack of attention to racism and racialization in our work, how we have disappeared race and racialization largely in the rehabilitation sciences. It's a beautiful, fast read for folks who might want to think about that particular coin of racism, and also it tends a bit to colonization as well. Yeah, but that works. Welcome, Mershan. Let's do things together.
And thank you for being here and asking the question, Mershan. I just want to thank you so much, Stephanie. This was so inspirational. I think everybody needs to see this just to have that entree, or like you're saying, that on-road to begin thinking about this. And then we're so lucky we have each other, because we can use these networking sessions and then level the playing field by bringing everybody's voices in so we can hear it and speak up in our own way, but also listen. And I think that's how we're going to hopefully move things forward. So you've just made, a huge opportunity for us to move forward and giving us a common on-ramp so we can start thinking about these things. So I'm so thankful that you were here and presented today, Stephanie. Bravo. And Nina.